The kingdom of Rin, cradled in the stern, granite arms of the mountains, was a place of mist and mystery. Its heart was not the palace of stone, but the sacred river, Alluvion, which sang a constant, low song as it carved its way through the valleys. On the day the twins were born, the sky performed a dreadful and beautiful magic. The sun, at its zenith, was slowly devoured by the moon, casting the land into an eerie, violet twilight. No birds sang. The world held its breath. In the queen's chamber, the cries of two infants pierced the silence. First Arin, then Kale. The royal seer, a woman so old she seemed woven from spider silk and memory, was brought to them. Her blind eyes, milky as moonstones, saw things hidden from others. She touched each baby's brow, her fingers trembling. One, she whispered, a sound like dry leaves skittering on stone, shall rule the flesh, the land, and the people. The other shall rule the spirits, the unseen, the eternal. The prophecy, spoken into that unnatural silence, did not feel like a blessing. It felt like a verdict. And in the tiny, clutching fist of the younger twin, Kale, a seed was planted. It was a tiny, dark thing, a seed of envy that needed only time to grow. As the boys grew, the prophecy shaped them like the river shapes the canyon walls. Arin, the elder by mere minutes, was a child of quiet depths and sun-dappled clearings. His heart was a soft thing, open to the world's pains. He was often found not in the grand halls of the palace, but in the humble healing huts, grinding herbs for the physician or sitting with the old and the sick, his presence a gentle comfort. He spent hours by the Alluvion, leaving simple offerings of river stones and wildflowers at the mossy shrines, listening to its whispers. Kale, his shadow and his echo, was forged of fiercer stuff. The training yard was his temple, the ring of steel his liturgy. He was bold, clever, and possessed a relentless fire that strategy and combat only stoked. The people's hearts softened when Arin passed. They offered him smiles and blessings. For Kale, they offered respect and averted eyes. He felt the difference keenly. Admiration, he learned, was a cold companion next to love. The imbalance took root in him, a thorn of resentment that pricked him with every kindness shown to his brother. King Thalen, their father, had been a mountain of a man, his voice a rumble that could command a battlefield or soothe a frightened colt. But age and a slow, wasting sickness had reduced him to an echo of himself. His great frame was now a brittle shell draped in silks. The court, once vibrant with his energy, grew still and anxious, the air thick with unspoken questions. One evening, as the firelight danced feebly on his gaunt face, he summoned his council. His voice was a thin, rasping thread. The line of succession, he breathed, is not for a dying king to decree. The ancient law is clear. On the night of rivers, when the veil is thin, the spirits of the Alluvion will choose our next ruler. They will crown the son who carries their blessing in his soul. The old nobles nodded, their faces grave with tradition. But Kale, standing rigidly by his father's bedside, felt the words like a physical blow. His future, the crown he had trained for, the throne he believed was his by right of will and strength, was to be left to the whims of unseen forces? His hands clenched into white-knuckled fists at his sides. He would not. He vowed silently. Let something as fragile and fickle as fate steal his destiny. The doubt was a worm in Kale's heart, gnawing at his confidence. He could not wait for the night of rivers. He needed to know. He climbed the winding stairs to the royal astrologer's tower, a place of dusty scrolls and complex brass instruments that charted the paths of stars. The old man jumped at his sudden entrance. The spirits, Kale demanded, his voice cutting through the quiet. Who do they favor? Tell me truly. The astrologer's hands fluttered over a chart mapping the very eclipse of the twins' birth, his face pale. My prince, he stammered, avoiding Kale's intense gaze. The river, it does not shout. It whispers. And the whispers I have heard, in the ripples and the deep currents, they speak only one name. They speak of Aran. Kale did not rage. He did not argue. He stood perfectly still, absorbing the words, letting them settle into the marrow of his bones. He turned without another word and descended the stairs, his footsteps echoing in the hollow silence. His eyes, as he emerged into the daylight, held a new, terrifying resolve, burning with a cold, dark fire that had nothing to do with the sun. The palace was a whirlwind of preparation for the coronation. Garlands of silver leaf and moon petal adorned every archway, and the scent of sacred incense clung to the tapestries. On the eve of the ceremony, under a sky littered with sharp, cold stars, Aran went alone to the alluvion. The river was a sheet of black silk, reflecting the heavens. He knelt on the damp bank, his hands dipping into the icy water. "Great spirits of the river," he whispered, his breath a pale cloud. "If I am the one you choose, I make you this vow. I will be a king for the people. I will rule with a just hand and a gentle heart. I will listen to your wisdom." Unseen in the shadows of the willows, Kale watched this display of sincerity. To him, it looked like performance, a calculated show of false humility that made his stomach clench. He stepped forward, his face arranged into a mask of brotherly affection. "The future awaits us both," Kale said, his voice warm as he pulled Aran into a tight embrace. "We face our destiny together, brother." The hug was a cage of flesh and bone, and within it, the final shape of his betrayal was forged. Dawn arrived, painting the high peaks in fiery gold and soft rose. The mist lay thick upon the alluvion, a ghostly blanket hiding its secrets. Kale, his heart a drum against his ribs, led Aran to a small, ceremonial raft tied to the ancient docking stone. "The high priest told me," Kale lied, his voice smooth and convincing, "that the chosen must approach the temple from the water to be blessed by the journey itself." Aran, whose trust was as deep and clear as the river once was, smiled and stepped onto the unstable vessel. They pushed off, the world shrinking to the small, rocking raft and the enclosing mist. When they reached the very center, where the current pulled strongest and the mist was a solid wall, Kale moved. It was not a shove of passion, but a cold, deliberate act. Aran's eyes, wide with a shock so profound it had no name, met Kale's for a single, eternal moment. Then he was gone, swallowed by the churning, hungry water. The golden circlet of the crown prince, which Aran had carried for the ceremony, flashed once in the weak light before it, too, vanished into the abyss. Kale returned to the palace alone, his clothes torn from clutching at branches, his face a masterpiece of crafted grief. "A tragedy," he cried out to the assembled court, his voice breaking. With practiced agony. "The current, it was too strong. It took him. I cannot save him." The hall erupted in a symphony of mourning, their grief a shield for his lie. With the only other heir gone, the path was clear. The coronation, somber and swift, proceeded. The heavy gold circlet, a twin to the one now lost in the river, was placed upon Kale's brow. It felt cold, a band of ice. That night, as the kingdom slept fitfully, a strange phenomenon occurred. The river alluvion began to glow with a soft, phosphorescent light, a faint, unearthly blue that seemed to pulse from its very depths. And if one listened very closely, leaning over the water, they might hear a whisper woven into the current song, a thread of sound that said, "Blood calls for balance." Within days, the whispers began. A woodcutter, lost and freezing in a sudden squall, claimed a young man with Aran's face led him to safety, vanishing before he could be thanked. A feverish child, on the brink of death, was touched by a cool, spectral hand in the night and woke up healed and hungry. The stories trickled from the villages into the town, a steady stream of rumor about a benevolent spirit in the forests, wearing Prince Aran's likeness, protecting the poor and punishing cruel masters. Kale, seated on his new throne, dismissed them with a wave of his hand. "Fancies," he declared. "The people mourn. They see what they wish to see." But his own hunting hounds, who had loved Aran dearly, refused to go near the riverbank. They would only stand and whine, their hackles raised, staring into the shimmering water as if facing a ghost they alone could see. A slow, creeping sickness began to afflict the kingdom of Rin. The crops in the fields, which had promised a bountiful harvest, withered where they stood, their stalks turning black and brittle as if scorched by an unseen frost. The livestock, usually gathered at the river's edge, now shied away from the water, lowing in distress, some choosing to die of thirst rather than drink from the alluvion. And Kale's dreams became a nightly torment. He would find himself back on the raft, but the water was clear as glass, and he could see Arin standing serene on the riverbed, his hair floating like a crown of reeds, his pale, knowing eyes fixed on Kale's. He would wake gasping, his chambers cold. One morning, he reached for his crown on the bedside table and recoiled. The golden circlet was beaded with cold, clinging dew, and along its inner rim was a dark, rust-red stain that looked unmistakably, terrifyingly, like blood. The signs could no longer be ignored. The land itself was rejecting him. Desperate, a king in title, but a prisoner in his own haunted mind, Kale undertook the journey to the northern caves. There lived the blind seeress, who spoke truths that could shatter souls. He found her in the absolute dark, her sightless eyes seeming to peer into the depths of his. "Why does the land sicken?" he begged, his voice stripped of its royal authority, raw with fear. "Why do I dream of him?" The seeress was silent for a long time. Then her voice, like stone grinding on stone, filled the cavern. "You asked the wrong question, king who is not king. You seek to understand the symptom, not the sickness. The spirits have already crowned the brother you drowned. The true king reigns below, in the world you cannot touch, in the court of the forever flowing." As the final word left her lips, a sharp, metallic crack echoed in the small space. Kale looked down. The golden circlet on his head, the symbol of his stolen power, had split cleanly in two, a hairline fracture running from front to back. Kale's world became a gallery of accusing reflections. His own face in a polished shield would shift, the features softening, the eyes gentling, until it was Arin who stared back at him, silent and sorrowful. The flames in the great hearth would twist and dance, forming his brother's visage in the heart of the fire. Even a casual glance into a rainwater barrel would reveal Arin's face looking up from the depths, his expression not of anger, but of profound disappointment. These visions never shouted. They only whispered, their voices a thread of sound in the quiet of his mind. "Was it worth it, brother? Can you feel the weight of the kingdom you broke?" Kale began to shun all reflective surfaces, living in a world of shadows and dimly lit rooms, his sanity a frayed rope, threatening to snap with every haunting whisper. The nobility, who had initially accepted Kale out of necessity, now turned on him. The failing crops and the strange, persistent rumors were proof of his spiritual bankruptcy. In the council chamber, the air thick with tension, his most senior advisor, Lord Edric, a man who had served his father with unwavering loyalty, stood. "Your Majesty," he said, his voice heavy with a grief that was not feigned, "these are not natural misfortunes. You have broken the sacred covenant with the river. You have spilled royal blood in its waters. The balance is shattered. The alluvion will reclaim what is owed, one way or another." The truth of the words, spoken aloud in front of everyone, was a spark to Kale's tinder-dry fear and pride. "Treason!" he roared, rising from his throne. "You speak treason. Guards, seize this old fool. Let his head adorn the gate as a lesson to all who would question their king." The order was carried out, but in that moment of tyrannical rage, Kale severed his last connection to reason and mercy, sealing his fate in the eyes of both man and spirit. The very night of Lord Edric's execution, the skies tore open. A storm of biblical fury lashed the mountains. Thunder roared like a grieving giant, and rain fell in solid sheets. The river Alluvion, swollen with the deluge, burst its banks with a sound like the world cracking in two. Icy, churning water swept through the valleys, swallowing homes and barns. But from the heart of this destruction, a miracle emerged. A A figure woven of shimmering light and river mist rose from the floodwaters. It was crowned with a circlet of living reeds and water lilies, and its face was the face of Aran, serene and filled with a terrible, ancient power. This spirit moved through the drowning chaos, and where its light fell, people found solid ground, their lungs filled with air, their terror soothed. A voice, the sound of the river itself, gentle, deep, and inexorable, spoke to them. Do not fear. You are protected. The true king guards you still. He was not a ghost of vengeance, but a savior born from the very act of betrayal. Haunted by the seeress's words, tormented by the spectral savior who had stolen the people's love, and half-mad with guilt and fear, Kale knew there was only one path left. He secluded himself in the royal library, poring over forbidden scrolls bound in rotten leather. He found it, a dark, desperate ritual, a plea for passage into the spirit realm. On the bank of the still raging alluvion, under a sky empty of stars, he built a pathetic altar of river stones. He sacrificed chests of gold, spilling his own royal blood upon the muddy ground, and abased himself, his pride finally broken. "Let me in," he screamed into the howling wind, his voice ragged. "Let me face him. Let me claim what is mine." The river seemed to hear. It did not grant his plea, but it acquiesced. The water before him swirled into a sudden, silent vortex, a gateway into the deep. With a final, desperate gasp, Kale plunged into the cold, dark opening. Kale awoke to the sensation of being submerged, yet he could breathe. He was not in water, but in a world made of water. The riverbed stretched before him into an endless, shimmering plain of silver sand and smooth, colorful stones. The sky above was not sky, but a swirling, mirrored ceiling reflecting the currents below. All around him, the souls of the departed drifted like silent, mournful fireflies, their forms faint and beautiful. As he walked, the very space around him whispered. He heard the echo of his own childish laughter, the sound of Aran's voice telling a story, the proud clap of his father's hand on his shoulder. Then, the whispers grew darker. The first bitter thought that Aran was favored, the astrologer's damning words, the final, brutal shove. He was walking through the living memory of the world, and his crime was the loudest, most dissonant echo in that silent, haunted realm. His path was blocked by a chasm that seemed to have no bottom, spanned only by a narrow, fragile-looking bridge of woven roots and solidified light. Before it stood the gatekeeper, a towering, spectral being whose form shifted like mist over the water, its presence radiating immense, calm power. "Halt, child of flesh!" Its voice echoed, not in the air, but within the core of Kale's being. "This is the threshold of the Spirit King. Only a heart that is pure, or one that has been washed clean by true remorse, may pass. Yours is still stained. Your journey ends here." Defeated, utterly broken, Kale fell to his knees. The lies, the ambition, the jealousy, the murder, it all came pouring out in a torrent of weeping, a raw and ugly confession offered not for absolution, but simply because he could no longer bear the weight. A long, assessing silence followed. Then the gatekeeper spoke. "Confession is the first step toward purity, but it does not erase the stain. You may pass, but know this, every step you take from here will be a penance." The gate opened, and as Kale stepped onto the bridge of light, his feet burned as if he walked on red-hot iron, a searing pain for every life his betrayal had harmed. At the very heart of the spirit realm, the lights softened to a gentle, pervasive glow, and the air hummed with a profound, deep peace. Here, the river widened into a tranquil sea, and in its center stood a throne. It was not crafted by mortal hands, but grown, a living structure woven from flowing water, tangled, glowing roots, and blossoms that bloomed and faded in a single breath. Upon it sat Aran, but he was no longer just a gentle prince. He was transformed, his form luminous and slightly translucent, his eyes twin pools of molten silver that held the wisdom and sorrow of the ages. He looked upon his trembling brother, not with hatred, but with a sadness so vast it seemed to be the very substance of the realm. "Kale," he said, and his voice was the gentle, devastating sound of the river flowing over ancient stones. "Why did you not trust the spirits? Why did you not trust me? The crown was never the prize you thought it was." Arin rose from his flowing throne, his movement like a current. "The crown you stole is a curse upon you and a blight upon the land. It can be lifted. There's a way." He extended a hand that shimmered with a soft, inner light. "Return. Confess your crime to the world, not in a desperate ritual, but in the light of day. Surrender the crown, not to me, but to the alluvion, the source you defiled. Relinquish your claim, not just to the throne, but to the envy that built it." Kale, seeing his brother's immense power and the serene peace that surrounded him, felt the old, familiar poison of envy twist in his gut, now mixed with the terror of returning to his kingdom a confessed murderer, a penniless and reviled usurper. The humiliation was a fate worse than any spiritual torment. "No," he snarled, the last of his defiance rising like a shield. "It was mine by right. The strength, the will, the ambition, it was all mine. I earned it." He would not bend. He would not break. Arin's silver eyes filled with a profound cosmic grief. "Then you choose the crown," he said, his voice barely a whisper, yet it filled the entire realm. "And so it shall be yours. Forever." At his words, the two halves of the golden circlet on Kale's head, which he had brought with him into this realm, began to glow with the heat of a miniature sun. The metal softened, melted, and ran in rivulets of liquid fire down his temples, searing into his skin, fusing to the very bone of his skull. Kale's scream was a raw, soul-shattering thing, a sound of ultimate agony that echoed not only through the spirit realm, but through every river, stream, and dewdrop in the mortal world of Rin, a wave of pure pain. Arin turned his face away, unable to witness the fullness of the justice he had to enact. A single, shimmering tear escaped his eye, and as it fell into the waters of his throne, it solidified into a new, bright star in the watery firmament above. Back in a mortal kingdom, as the echo of Kale's scream faded from the air, the unnatural storm ceased as suddenly as it had begun. The furious floodwaters receded, not as a slow withdrawal, but as if a great plug had been pulled, leaving behind clean, fertile silt. The black rot vanished from the crops, and by the next sunrise, the fields were exploding with life, the grain tall and golden, the fruits heavy and bright. The people, venturing out from the high ground, looked to the east. There, in the dawn light, many swore they saw the faint, benevolent outline of Arin's face in the clouds, a gentle, watchful guardian smiling upon the land he had died for. The time of terror was over. The balance, bought with a terrible price, had been restored. The blind seeress stood at the palace gates, speaking to the gathered, hopeful people. Her voice, once filled with grim prophecy, was now warm with revelation. "People of Rin, hear me. The kingdom has two thrones now. One of flesh, which sits empty and cursed, a lesson to all who would covet power over love, and one of spirit, which is forever occupied. King Arin guards us from the world beyond. He is our shield in the storm, our comfort in the dark. The balance between the seen and the unseen is restored." Arin's name was no longer spoken with grief, but with reverence. It became a prayer, a blessing spoken over children, a sacred word that meant protection, justice, and enduring peace. In the spirit realm, Kale was trapped in a state far worse than death. He was a being of eternal, searing pain, neither alive nor dead. The molten gold was now a permanent, burning part of him, a crown of everlasting agony. His punishment, his eternal task, was to wander the endless, mirrored riverbeds of the underworld, polishing the ghost of the crown he could never wear, a futile, endless effort to erase a stain that was now part of his very essence. And wherever he looked, in the still, dark pools, in the shimmering surface of the stones, in the very air, he saw his brother's face. But it was not a face of vengeance or gloating. It was a face of profound, unending and sorrowful forgiveness, which was in its own way the most exquisite and painful punishment of all. Generations passed. The story of the twin princes became the foundational legend of Rin, its most important lesson told and retold. Parents would gather their children by the fireside and say, "Beware the poison of envy in your heart, for it is a thirst that can never be quenched." Remember, the river remembers every deed, good and ill. And when the spring rains came and the rivers swelled with snowmelt, the elders would nod wisely and say, "Do not fear the high water. It is only Kale's tears, forever falling, forever washing the banks of the kingdom he failed to love, trying in vain to clean the crown he can never remove." To honor their eternal king, the people of Rin created the Festival of the Lanterns. Each year, on the anniversary of a night Arin became the spirit king, the entire kingdom would line the banks of the alluvion as twilight deepened. In a silent, beautiful ceremony, they would set afloat thousands of small, candle-lit lanterns crafted from paper and reeds, each one a tiny, brave star upon the dark water, a silent thank you to the spirit of balance. As they watched the lights drift and dance, carried by the current Arin now commanded, they would whisper prayers not just for prosperity, but for the strength to forgive, to be content, and to quiet the envious whispers that sometimes stirred in their own hearts. And as the last lantern vanished around the river bend, its light swallowed by the night, and the storyteller's voice faded into the rustling of the leaves, if you were to peer into the deep, dark water of the alluvion, you would see it, a faint, ethereal glow from the very bottom. And there, side by side, resting on the silver sand, were two crowns. One was of twisted black and gold, fused to a skull-shaped shadow, forever burning with a cold, inner fire. The other was woven of pure, undying light, woven from the river's heart and the memory of a good man. And on the wind, a final, gentle whisper would reach your ears, a truth as old as the mountains and as endless as the river. Power fades. Kingdoms crumble. Gold turns to dust. But the spirit remembers every truth, every kindness, and every betrayal. And the river of time carries it all, forever,